Hi, I'm Yulia, and this is Red Lines, where we discuss daring subjects and cross some eponymously red lines. Today with me, I have operator Starsky and Denis Davidov, and we're going to be discussing Zelensky's peace plan and what it might entail, because now it has changed to the victory plan and how it might be possible or impossible with the ever so delayed Western help. Guys?
Operator Starsky. Hi,
Bro,
nice.
you are in the middle.
Oh,
After
okay,
you.
okay, okay. Hi, guys. My name is Dennis, and as you probably know, I'm a YouTuber reviewing the situation in Ukraine, the war actually. Um, well, as we discussed with the guys already in a pre-record, it's hard to comment the peace plan, which actually do not exist openly. It hasn't been yet published by President Zelensky. However, it was announced for the small circle. Donald Trump, Kamala Harris, or Joe Biden. So those guys, they know about this peace plan, and I think that something should be done to provide Ukraine with the long-range missiles. And the part of that peace plan could be the delivery of those long-range missiles. Why is it important? Because we need to counteract the Russian threats because they obtain from their friends like Iran and North Korea the long-range missiles. It's been reported by the Wall Street Journal that Iran already sent some of the ballistic missiles to the Russian Federation. Yes, those are with a much less range compared to the Russian Iskander missiles, which have the range of around 550 kilometers. But still, Iranian missiles are much cheaper compared to Iskanders, and Russia might use them widely, especially if we speak about the Kursk operation, how Russia might cut Ukrainian supplies. So Ukraine needs to counteract to that threat, obviously. And Ukraine doesn't have its own long-range missiles. Like we had some of the Tochka U, but not a lot from the Soviet Union. So the new weaponry should be delivered. Otherwise, Ukraine will not cope with the Russian supply lines, Russian military airfields. At the same time, I would say that it's kind of late to think that Ukraine is now capable to demolish all of the Russian aviation, which was based in all of the airfields near to Ukraine, because Russia understood the threat and they moved, as John Kirby said, 90% of aviation from the local airfields, like, for example, from Baltimore and Voronezh. But around 4 months ago, there were many planes. So, in a way, we already lost this coat of guard scenario for the Russian aviation, which is kind of bad. But I still think that Ukraine should obtain those missiles because still um, it increases the capability for Ukraine to withstand against Russian aggression on the Russian territory, because now we see with the Kharkiv operation that Russia uses its territory to attack Ukraine widely. So about the peace plan itself, I think that it includes, according to many of the Telegraph, they say that this peace plan includes the long range missiles points, Nate.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean,
I
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I completely agree with Dennis. And by the way, it's really, really cool to see you guys, my good old friends, in one place. So I'm Operator Starsky, Ukrainian veteran and war commentator. I don't know how to call myself, but I believe that this plan will include different, I would say, requests or inquiries to our partners regarding the long-range weapons, regarding the air defense, regarding the necessary weaponry that we require at this point. Because, for example, if we want to protect Ukraine frontline cities from Russian tactical aviation, if we want to protect our cities from Russian strategic aviation that launches their missiles from Caspian Sea, etc., then we need to have measures to do so. And we're talking about the air defense systems, land-based, and we're also apparently talking about the interceptors, maybe jet fighters that we can use to intercept those airplanes, which is, again, it's a question because we don't really know the plan itself. We didn't see it, but I believe that President will show this plan to the allies, to our partners, and whatever is in this plan, I believe, again, it's just my opinion, there will be requests for different sorts of weaponry and reasoning why this should be delivered and how it will be used. Of course, long-range weapons is something crucial. Today, we received another response from the US that the US don't really believe that using long-range weapons will change anything crucially. On the other hand, of course, you can just provide them to us and then we will see. But the thing is, there's another component to this, and I believe that this plan should also include such extremely important thing as combating Russian propaganda, because we need to do something. Why it's important? A lot of our allies are ready and they agree to let Ukraine strike Russia with long-range weapons on the Russian territory. Other allies, and some of them are crucial allies, like the United States, for example, they hesitate. And the reason they hesitate is because Russia constantly keeps sending signals that it will cross 100th red line, etc., and bring the war to the escalation and the World War III, which basically is extremely funny because Russia can escalate, however, as much as they want, but the rest of the world cannot. But the problem is, yesterday I read that affidavit from the FBI investigation regarding the social design agency run by Russian PR specialist, PR expert Gambashidze, and in those that is extremely interesting document. And there, one of the main narratives that Russians agreed to spread on the West is nuclear hysteria. That is something that they were working on since 2023. In like the scale of this work is enormous. It's hard to imagine. They were involving millions of fake accounts, millions of commentaries. But why it's important? It's important for Russians to talk about it, because when Russians studied the let's say the attitude, the condition, the mind of the Western citizen, they understand that people on the West are not afraid of Russian nuclear weapons much or enough for Russians. And this is something that bothers them. And this is something that makes them create those fake accounts and spread false narratives that will scare the living hell out of people about Russian nuclear weapons. It bothers Russians, and they feel that it's really important to talk about it. That is why we can see a lot of statements made by Dmitry Medvedev, by Putin, by Volodin. Today he also made threatening statement towards the West regarding nuclear weapons. This is something that bothers them for some reason, and I think that the reason is obvious.
Well, because they're not big and scary anymore, right? But also, I think that has a lot to do with the fact that the people that were scared of the Russian nuclear weapons are not necessarily the people who are on the internet today, because those are the people who lived through the Cold War. And that's not the main populace of the internet. The main populace of the internet are people who are like our age and below, way below, right? And those people don't see Russia as something threatening. Those people kind of, either some crazy people on the left and on the far right see Russia as an ally and see Russia as like a friend, and the other people just don't. They see all of the memes and they see all of the things that have been happening, and they just don't, it's not serious to them. And also, again, they didn't have to like do bomb shelter drills and any of these things. It's not real to them. But I was going to say that,
and it's really sorry for interrupting, but I think it's really important, of course, to not to lose our mind, being too optimistic or overly pessimistic. We should we should try to understand the reality as much objectively as possible, because there's a lot of cases when people either don't even consider Russian army a threat. On the other side of the spectrum, we can see people that are extremely, extremely scared of Russia. The truth is in the middle, and we need to read and learn as much sources of the information we can to understand what they really are and what is the threat.
well, I wanted to comment here on two things. One that's Denis said and one that you said. So I'm going to go ahead with yours first and then with Denis's, so we do the full circle. So one of the things that you said is combating propaganda. And I think that's so important, especially in the face of I think it was Ray Ruth, his name was, the guy who tried to shoot Donald Trump, which in my personal humble opinion is a PR stunt. And I feel like we're going to be seeing a lot of those before the election. But he went to Ukraine and he was a scam artist. He's like this guy who's had like convictions and criminal history. And from my personal source at a major American bank, he's had 12 bank accounts closed for fraud. So this guy came to Ukraine to basically find a new grift. The grift didn't happen. He left Ukraine. Every single person on the ground has like not mildly, but in layman's terms, told him to screw off. No one wanted to work with him. He was imposing and he was crazy. He was trying to sell Afghani mercenaries to Ukrainian people or to Ukrainian units. It was a crazy story. And anyone who's like seen this guy at any point or has heard of him knows that it's just like it's a joke, right? And now suddenly in all headlines of major newspapers like The Time, he's a pro-Ukraine activist. A war tourist and a grifter is not a pro-Ukraine activist. There is a guy who is also on YouTube who travels the world, who votes for Donald Trump, who came to Ukraine and now makes videos saying that, Kyiv is a very rich city and that's because of our taxes. It looks great. And we've definitely built it on American taxes. Just having visited Ukraine does not mean you're pro-Ukrainian. So these types of things, for sure, we really need to combat them because there is also going to be more and more of them as the American election comes closer. But backtracking to something Denis said is we need long-range weapons to hit Russia's airfields and Russia's ammo storage depots and military infrastructure in general. And we have heard that a lot of it was moved, but I saw this map made by ISW the other day, I believe, and it was a map of JDAMs strikes, the upgraded JDAMs, and they basically reach every airfield except for Murmansk and one near Finland. So technically, and Russia can't really launch their aircraft from that far away, so they would have to move them at some point anyway. So yes, that would be very helpful. And then my personal addition here that you two might comment on is Crimea. And I don't think in terms of peace troops, I think that there have been a lot of rumors that basically we do not have enough fulfilled promises and enough equipment and enough manpower to take back both Donbass and Crimea. But of course, we're not going to choose between the two. And if we were to try to return something to crumble Russia's front line, it would be Crimea. So the idea is that all the efforts would be concentrated on taking back Crimea, and then the rest will follow and crumble. What do you think about that? And do you think that could be in Zelensky's viable peace plan as per Linda Thomas Greenfield?
I believe that this can easily be part of the strategy because it's something really obvious. In the first place, if Putin loses Crimea, he's dead. But it also requires building a proper fortified line of defense in order to make sure that Russians want to move further. And we should also make sure that we have enough weaponry that will let us eliminate their personnel. Because again, we can see a lot of cases when Ukraine was throughout the war was hitting Russian command centers, disrupting Russian logistic lines, etc., etc. But we cannot use as much artillery as Russians do in order to eliminate Russian personnel. which Russians don't really care about, because they have a lot of soldiers that are literally thrown into meat assaults. And just so viewers could understand, we have to have enough artillery to deal with them, considering that they're thrown into meat assaults, because they're disposable, like all the Russian soldiers are to their command. So taking Crimea, again, it's not as easy as somebody may think. It's an obvious thing, but it's not as easy as somebody might consider, because first of all, it requires dealing with Russian fleet. It requires dealing with Russian personnel that is, again, stationed there. There's a lot of their aviation. There's a lot of Russian troops that are prepared and expecting to be used in the second echelon. So it's a hard task. On the other hand, of course, a lot of experts agree on this, that in case Ukraine manages to find its way to the Azov Sea, it's almost 50% of success. I cannot say whether it's so, because I'm not a general and I'm not a military expert. I'm a humble captain. But I know one thing for sure, is that Zelenskyy has much more information than us three combined. And apparently he understands what exactly we need to bring our country to victory, because this is a plan for victory. I really hope that it's not just, rebranding, that it's something that can be effective.
Yeah, I really hope it's not a peace formula rebranded. But Denis, what do you think about this? And I guess, what do you think the peace plan could be and what it could entail? And then we can talk a little more about sort of criticisms of that, and whether we think it's possible, given that we don't necessarily get any of the aid. Well, not any, but a lot of the aid we're promised. And is it really feasible to build victory plans while we can expect?
So yeah, obviously Zelenskyy will include, as I say, the long-range weaponry, and there could be also some sort of the temporary solutions with Russia, as we see many of the countries somehow started to speak about peace. We heard those narratives even from Germany. Yes, those narratives later on appear to be fake, as our side says, but those rumors are also like many of the countries are now pushing the sides for negotiations. But the main thing that Putin, I think, doesn't want to negotiate at this stage, and he came out with his demands that Ukraine should give Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson Oblast, and all of the Luhansk to Russia. So it's at this stage, it's really hard to negotiate with Russia. And also, we heard the narratives from the United States both politicians, that Ukraine shouldn't join NATO. So I guess it's wrong idea, because if you let Russians to give all the territories, to take all the territories they occupied, you will not recognize those. Okay, it will be the second Minsk agreements, nothing more, because Ukraine will not have guarantees for the NATO. If you have guarantees for NATO, okay, this peace plan may at least temporarily work. Russia will not strike Ukraine in this case, the rest of the territory. But if you do not give the NATO membership, this is the second Minsk agreements, and I think Zelenskyy will speak about that as well. And from the Ukrainian government, we heard that they don't want to sign that kind of the deal with Russia. About Crimea, I told in one of my videos that this operation is possible, but I recorded around 1 year ago. For now, I don't see that Ukraine has enough resources for the big full-scale landing operation. There were some of the tries to get Kimbersky Peninsula or Kimbersky Kasa under control in Mykolaiv Oblast, but the landing operation failed at least two of the times. Our guys were repelled by Russians at this stage. So in Crimea, Russia has many more forces. So for now, I don't think that the landing operation in Crimea is really possible with big success. Maybe just partial success, but it requires lots and lots of resources. And unfortunately, without the Western constant military support, Ukraine doesn't have those kind of the resources. At the same time, I'm sure that Ukraine will obtain enough weaponry for the next year at least. Yes, it will be hard to negotiate with the United States with the same huge military package as they gave us this year. But I think that maybe they're going to figure out the new military support with other countries and also confiscated Russian asserts. I think all of that will be included in this plan for Ukraine just to continue in 2025, because the winter time is also crucial for Ukraine to consolidate resources to be prepared for the summer campaign. Because what we see now, like Russia advances in Pakrovsk on the east, is the result of not enough military support during the previous winter. Then Ukraine wasn't able to prepare for this offensive scale of the Russian side. I think like that. So it's crucial for 2025 for Ukraine to have enough weaponry, and I think they will discuss this stuff also.
Well, I think a very sort of not inspiring, but a thing that makes me feel a little better is that a lot of these packages that were announced last year and this year, their delivery date was actually 2025. So
good.
I think a lot of the tanks and a lot of the APCs and a lot of mortars and stuff like that, they had to be fixed up to be delivered to Ukraine, and most of the delivery dates weren't until 2025. Because it doesn't matter when they really announce these packages, most of them are not, most of them don't come within 2 to 3 months. Most of them are sort of like, oh, delivery due date by 2028. And a lot of the stuff that was announced in 2022 still hasn't been delivered to Ukraine, and its due date is 2025. One of the things that does kind of get me thinking is that Zelensky's rhetoric from the very beginning was that we can only negotiate with Russia if we have the upper hand. And I think that rhetoric hasn't changed. So it's very interesting that now he says he has a victory plan, or our government says they have a victory plan. Western countries are starting to talk about negotiations with Russia. Ukraine goes into Kursk, and Zelensky says that Kursk is only a part of victory plan. So that is sort of some, I would be very, very disappointed and incredibly scared if there wasn't that sort of chain of events where we still insist that we can only negotiate with Russia if we have something to sort of hold over them. And I don't think they believe Kursk is a lot to hold over them, because I don't think it is. And I don't think they would. Our government is also naive enough to think that. So I wonder what is in their plans, because I don't think they would be so solemnly kind of insisting on negotiating with Russia on this victory plan if there wasn't an ace of spades that we're all missing and that we're not seeing through.
Yulia, I think that also here the long-range weaponry is critical, because Ukraine not just may trade the Kursk for some sort of the negotiations from the Ukrainian perspective advantage, but also Ukraine may strike lots of the Russian military facilities and just show Russia that they cannot move any longer. They are losing a lot their resources. Simply, the idea, from what I understood from the Western politicians, military analytics, that we need to show Putin that his attempts to conquer Ukraine will not work. That's it. And for that, we need more tools for that.
Also, Stoltenberg recently, his rhetoric changed quite a bit, because I think he's very careful. He's a little too careful with what he says, and he's a very politically correct person that pisses me off quite a lot, because as someone representing NATO, I wish he was a little more direct. But he recently said that there are no wars without a risk, and all wars are risks. And he said I think it's a lot riskier to let Russia win in Ukraine than to let Ukraine take risks. And that's something very different from what all of them have been saying lately. So that also gives me, a bit of a peace of mind in terms of what they have brewing behind the scenes. Because I think a lot of people have a lot of questions and a lot of concerns with this victory plan.
I can say this during the recent summit that took place, uniting, all the NATO members. They adopted the strategy that basically recognized Russia the main threat for NATO countries, which is something that didn't happen for quite a while. I believe since Soviet times. That is why these narratives are heard today, and this is why I think we will be hearing more and more of that, because during the next summit, I believe NATO countries will be trying to come up with some kind of strategy on how to deal with this threat. And probably this is when the victory plan of Zelenskyy will be also very, very handy, But regarding Stoltenberg, 100%, I'm really happy that nowadays NATO countries understand this, and it's not something that is being discussed. It's something that was decided already. The problem is, again, the society that is fed with Russian propaganda, that NATO is fueling war, etc., etc., and we have to deal with this threat somehow. Which is, again, it requires a lot of contribution from the governments.
Well, I think the tug of war here now is that all of the European Western allies have kind of dropped the whole careful with Russia act, but the US, being the main military support, still hasn't. And that's kind of where, the rope keeps moving back and forth in terms of what we are allowed or what we're not allowed to do. I'm seeing a lot of effort from the UK, which is also inspiring because, I don't want to bring up Bojo because I'm so happy he's not there anymore, because that was such an upsetting sort of thing it was such an upsetting dichotomy to see where he was so hated in the UK and he was so loved in Ukraine. But he's kind of coming back to the political scene to discuss long range strikes. And he did say something very interesting as well. He said, we set an example by giving all this aid to Ukraine, by going to Kyiv during war, by being first, and then other countries followed. Let's give them storm shadows, and then everything else is just going to fall in place. So it does look like the UK is on the brink of letting us use storm shadows, and that means the US is going to follow. But the US is always going to have that problem, at least with Biden. On the Democratic side, I'm not even going into Trump because that is just a disaster for us all around. But with Biden, there is always going to be this carefulness issue and a little too much thinking and discussing and considering and escalation. So that's a moment here. I'm also seeing that there is a very interesting thing. I don't know if you guys have seen it happening in the UN, which you said something about kind of treating Russia as an aggressor and removing Russia from all of these spaces. So Finland, I think, had officially at this point insisted on not like discontinuing the single country veto at the UN. And they have also suggested to add more countries to the Security Council because Africa and Asia is underrepresented. And they are obviously advocating for Russia to be removed from the Security Council. But that's an interesting thing because I don't think they can remove members, but they can add members. And with adding members, they can definitely rearrange the way that veto works and the way that they make decisions and the way that they send help, sort of. So that might be a very good driving factor as well. It does look like the world is moving, and some things are starting to happen and some things are reforming. So that's at least also something that gives me a little bit of hope.
I don't really understand why Security Council should consist of 10 countries. It's crazy because we're talking about the security of the whole world. I have no idea why it's still not changed until today.
Nepotism. You know?
Yeah, and it's supposed to be like that. More than 140 countries condemned Russian invasion. More than 140 members of the UN voted to condemn Russian invasion of Ukraine. And I believe that if today all those countries could be represented in the UN, that could dramatically change everything. Nowadays, when there's just a bunch of countries deciding the fate of the whole world, deciding the collective security, it's completely wrong. It's as wrong as having Russia there on the first place, because they were never selected as Russian Federation member of the UNSC.
They illegally inherited it, yeah. Denis, also, I think that would be a question for you. So, the second batch of F-16s is due to be delivered in the next 3 to 4 months. How do you think that is, as a pilot, going to affect the battlefield, if at all? Because I think in the media space, F-16s are the saving grace, but in reality, we sort of have very few of them, and they change the picture, but they don't necessarily. I don't think they change it as much as people would like to believe.
Well, at first we say that Ukraine uses F-16s for now as the defense tool, not the tool to fight against the Russian military airfields or the tool against the Russian Sukhoi 34 fighters bombers, which Russia uses to drop the aviation gliding bombs to hit Ukraine. At the moment, maybe because F-16s actually less they cannot compete with Russian Sukhoi 35, for example, fighter jet, the one of the newest generation of the Russian aircraft manufacturer, because those have I think, the most powerful radars in the world. They also have the long-range missiles. So for now, Ukraine hesitates to use just a few of the airplanes against the Russian aviation. But if there will be more, Ukraine might use the United States strategy. Then United States uses F-16s with the large groups, and so you need to have lots of the airplanes to fight against the Russian fighter jets. That's the tool. One more thing, that Ukraine for now is in lack of the really long-range missiles for F-16s. We have, I think, AGM-120, the middle modification with a range up to something like 100 kilometers. And we need 120, yeah. So I think we will need to have more. And there are some of the rumors spread by that propaganda channels that the deal already signed for the longer range missiles for F-16s, and they are coming this winter. So if it is true, it is kind of encouraging. Also, there was the information that Ukraine obtains the cruise missiles from the United States with a range up to 900 with something kilometers. That's also encouraging, and those could be used on F-16s as well. So for now, Ukraine tries to use F-16s as the defense tool against the drones, against the Russian cruise missiles. But in the future, I think they'll be used on the battlefield fully. I'm quite optimistic about F-16s. It's good that finally everything moved towards the direct delivery for Ukraine of those airplanes. We all were waiting for them. But at the current stage, it's not really a game changer. We need to wait a little to have many more of those airplanes coming in the next couple of years. Hopefully, the next year, Ukraine will start to use them with a full operational scale, let's say. But F-16s are much better compared to the Soviet-made MiG-29s, especially those F-16s that we obtain with good radars, with quite a good avionics, and I hope pilots will be also trained for that, because we also heard that the United States is limiting the pilot training for Ukraine. They say, okay, you'll have 20 of the airplanes, you should have 40 pilots. Well, I don't know the real figures, but here I'm saying, for you to understand that definitely there was even the conflict between Ukraine and the United States to intensify the pilot training. And we also obviously know about the case with F-16 that was that crashed. Let's say for now, hopefully investigation will discover why it happened, whether it was the friendly fire malfunction or the pilot error. I think that airplanes were fine. I mean, F-16, the airplane itself was fine because it just passed the maintenance before delivery. But I don't want to speculate. Hopefully, we'll have the report. The problem is that it happened in military, and they don't usually publish the reports as fully as you have some accidents in commercial aviation. So, obviously, with that loss, Ukraine. It's like a reputational loss, obviously, but it will not play a big role in a long-term perspective. Let's say then Ukraine obtains many more F-16s and have a good pilot running. Many more pilots will fly those. So that's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it does accomplish a lot with propaganda, right? Because as always, they will use anything to blame Ukraine. My observation was that, the Western publications immediately went into pilot error because nothing could have happened to the F-16.
Yep.
But I think we're also forgetting that F-16s are pretty old aircraft. Like for Ukraine, they're modern aircraft, right? As in, like, we don't have anything better than that. But the United States has already moved on to F-35s. F-16s are great aircraft, don't get me wrong. But also some of them have been repaired and modified with parts from other aircraft. So it wouldn't be really uncanny that something could have jammed or something could have happened because a pilot also didn't eject himself. But then again, our training has been sped up multiple ways, and of course it's hard and it's in a different language, so it could have been pilot error. I've just noticed that we immediately jump to not the three of us, but as the world, we immediately jump to the conclusion that it had to have been a Ukrainian pilot's fault. But we're also forgetting that no one was talking about F-16s for, like, I don't know, maybe 40 years until the war in Ukraine happened, and we sort of gave them the biggest PR they could have ever had in this.
Well, actually, for Ukraine, it's the best aircraft because there are lots of the spare parts for this airplane, and they're like, the modification is old, but it was modernized. It was modernized up to date. You have state-of-art radars. You have modern-day avionics, lots of the weaponry. So I don't think that F-16 is like really outdated. I think it may conquer at some point with Russian aviation. Not Sukhoi 35, but with Sukhoi Su-30, some of the modifications of the F-16s, I think they may handle the Russian older modifications of the airplanes if you install the best great equipment on them. On F-16s.
I'm really happy, by the way, to hear that my friend Dennis is so optimistic about F-16s as a pilot. But I checked the information of F-16s several weeks ago. The speed of the drone, of the Shahed drone, is approximately 100 knots. They're very slow flying. The stall speed of F-16 is 150 dirty. So I don't want to speculate, but in my humble opinion, as being non-pilot, we have a living pilot here, but as being non-pilot, I believe that human error is 100%. Why he didn't eject, again, I have no idea. But I remember back in the days when, before the full-scale Russian invasion, when we were armed with things like, we were already armed with javelins, we had Stugna anti-tank missiles, and Russians were often using their armored vehicles and tanks. It's like years before the full-scale Russian invasion when we were deployed with my brigade at Svetlodarsk Bulge. And even though we had those, but in most cases we would not use them because it's like, when you launch a missile and it's like an apartment in Kiev like flew like in that direction because it was like expensive and stuff. So again, with all respect to this pilot, I can imagine why he didn't eject. Who knows? We need to wait until the end of the investigation and understand what happened. Again, Dennis said that Ukrainian Air Force doesn't usually publish such reports for the public. But What I wanted to ask Dennis is what sort of aircraft we need to successfully combat such airplanes as Su-35, for example, Su-34, Su-35.
The only competitor for Sukhoi 35 is F-35. I think so. Maybe Raptors also, F-25. But, Sukhoi 35 really has the most powerful radar. It sees everything hundreds of kilometers ahead, and the Russians have the long range missiles. So it's really hard to compete. Well, if you have many F-16s, you can do it. Like if you have a couple of Sukhoi 35s and many F-16s, you can somehow handle it. I'm not good in aviation battle aircraft battle tactics, but that's the policy United States uses against the possible scenario to fight against prevailing enemy like Russia, which has Sukhoi 35. So yeah, like that. Also, Patriots help, as practice shows. Yeah, Patriots help a lot with that thing, but Sukhoi should be within the range of 160 kilometers, I think, of the Patriot system. Yeah.
But then F-16s are also up-powered by AWACS, right? The Australian
Yeah, yeah,
aircraft
yeah.
has a very
That's all.
powerful radar. And
Yeah,
then, so I
that's
have two
good.
questions here. So one is, do we think that I mean, Russia evades sanctions, right? But how many of these Su-35s does Russia have? And would imposing more sanctions on Russia make it impossible to create those powerful radars, right? Because they're not necessarily creating it in Russia. They're assembling them from parts. So if they
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
have that many aircraft, then we could potentially prevent them building more, you know?
yeah. They have actually they built well. I will not Google it, but they have many of Sukhoi 35s. And recently, I think Ukrainian media informed Napalm. They came out with a big investigation about the Thales company, the company which is based in France. They produce the avionics and equipment for military and also for commercial use, like for example for Airbus, all the screens and in the cockpit they are made in Thales within this company. And the same screens, but military grade, were found in the Russian Sukhoi Su-30 SM aircrafts, and it was a big investigation, like a big scandal. And Russia obtained this very crucial equipment for them through Kazakhstan. They even publish all of the documents, all of the data from that company. So Russia works via the third countries in most of the cases to obtain the Western-made technology. And I think Western companies, they know about this stuff. It is the behind the curtains agreement to, earn money, continue to earn that even more because Russia is willing to pay, I think, more for those kind of the schemes, for the risks, for those companies. So I shared on my media, and it was a really, really interesting investigation. I believe Russia obtains everything like that through those schemes.
Yeah, Russia loves, Georgia. Russia loves transporting things from Poland through Belarus. Somehow, it's really difficult to kind of prevent them from being able to buy this equipment. There was a whole, I think last year there was a whole kind of like business front discovered in America where these Russians were buying American washing machines and drones and parts, and they were sending them to Emirates, and then from Emirates to like other countries, and then to Russia, or Russians were bringing them from Emirates to Russia. So I mean, it's difficult, but the more difficult we make it, I guess the more difficult it is for them to continuously create these things and maintain them, because we know, for instance, like radars are good, but do we know if they can provide maintenance for them in a timely manner, right? Or like maintenance for their aircraft, because the more we kind of tighten the knot around their neck, the harder it is for them, and then maybe their SUs are going to be crashing, not due to pilot errors, but due to maintenance issues. And hopefully that will start happening soon, although it doesn't look like we're doing enough for that to make a
Yes,
huge impact.
Sanctions really should work in much better way, as we expected at the very beginning of the war. Then those sanctions were applied in Russia. We thought, okay, Russia is over. Like, just look at this. The sanction list. They are unable to produce anything. They will not be able. But we see that the schemes are working. Like, and it's the shame actually.
Well,
I,
Russians
I,
are.
I
Sorry for interrupting you.
yeah, yeah.
I think Starsky and I have talked many times about the fact that the West doesn't understand Russia, and I think that they've underestimated the whole like brigada mentality they have from the 90s, and how Russian billionaires and millionaires and oligarchs and random people keep a lot of their assets not in Russia but abroad, so they can actually still access them because they have those bank accounts. And if you're not a millionaire or an oligarch, but you have like hundreds of thousands of Russian money in euros or dollars, you can still access it and you can still use it, and you're not going to tip off anyone's scales because you're not a billionaire. And I think that Russia does have a lot of spies and a lot of like sleeper agents around the world that literally serve the purpose of being a bank account. So it's I think before Russia can actually collapse and be ended in terms of sanctions, the West needs to start understanding Russia and Russian schemes, because they were like, the Western people were confused as to how Russia evades sanctions and how they buy Netflix subscriptions and sign up for YouTube. And I'm like, are you kidding me? They have whole services. People started making money off of people wanting to buy Netflix. Like, it's Russia. I don't think I think they're so far removed. Western people, unfortunately, and politicians are so far removed of how schemy and Russia is.
The problem is that there are still many of the countries that are willing to make a deal with Russia, make a trade, like China, South Asian countries, Latin America, African countries, Turkey. So yes, the Western democracies, and Japan, for example, they apply the sanctions on Russia, but the rest of the countries, they are searching for the schemes. They're searching for the way outs. Yeah.
Turkey is definitely benefiting a lot from Russia
Yeah.
not having Western connections. There are Russians fly into Turkey to go everywhere else in the world. Apparently, Turkish hotels, especially the all-inclusive ones, have never been as Russian as they are today, and that's saying something, because they've always been Russian, to the point where Turkish people speak Russian, most of them. So it's quite. Turkey is definitely breaking bank on this, and so are other countries.
I saw like the pictures, like you can pay via cryptocurrency there. They did it for purpose in Russia. Also, they recently just stopped accepting the Mir cards, the Russian payment, but before they accepted those, so they're looking for the way outs for Russians in Turkey, and it's openly, like in every shop you may find how to pay with a cryptocurrency and everything.
Well, anecdotally, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one thing, that West doesn't understand how much dedicated Russians are to reach their goals. So much. For example, if you take countries like Iran that were most sanctioned before Russia, years before Russia, same stuff. They currently produce ballistic missiles and drones that Russia buys from them, and Russians themselves are very, very much dedicated. We have to be much more dedicated than Russians if we want to win. And there's a problem. The problem is, as you mentioned, the brigada-style mentality. That is only language that Putin and his elites understand. They don't understand things like sanctions. They don't understand things like negotiations, partnership, etc. They understand the language of people buried in the concrete, people who explode in the cars, people that are being drowned or assassinated and poisoned with combat chemicals and stuff. This is the only language that Putin understands, and the problem is, unlike Putin and unlike those criminals, we cannot use such measures because we are not them, fortunately or unfortunately. But we have to understand this, accept this, and find some kind of approach to them, because otherwise they will not stop, and they will their motivation will not go anywhere. It's still there. They still very much dedicated to winning this war over the democratic world. Their channels like RT, Sputnik, etc., got dropped from the TV channels on the West, from YouTube, Facebook recently. It's really good. But at the same time, they don't care about it because they can create 100 such channels every single day using bot farms and AI, and keep spreading their propaganda. After after Russia Today was blocked, basically on the big scale, around Europe, their efforts to increase the support for the far right movements in Europe, in the United States, they were even bigger than before that, because they accepted this as a challenge. So you're shutting down our 3 channels, we will open 5 million channels. That is why we have to be much more dedicated. Unfortunately, people don't really like to think about it, because it means, war, increasing expenditures on the army, on different security services, etc., and also war is something really inconvenient for people to think about, but it's reality.
Well, it's also kind of, sorry, I'm just going to be quick. It's also sort of, you mentioned that Russia can create channels like RT every day. They can create them through, Tucker Carlson and through Kim.com and through various different influencers, and they pay them, right? And the interesting battle here is that you and me and the Liz, we have to find ways to monetize to do this full time. And we have to rely on people sort of like supporting us, right? And we basically have to like beg people to pay our living in order for us to be able to do our job, while no Russian influencers ever seem to have any trouble with money, ever, because they're not there trying to survive off of people's support. They're there paid to say and do what they say and do. And unfortunately, Ukraine doesn't have the capacity to, pay people who advocate for Ukraine to be able to support themselves, which is why we see so many Western people who come here, and they come here as volunteers, and then they run out of funds and they go back to Australia, America, Britain to make some more money for that period of time, like, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 months. Their channels are not active. They're not talking about things anymore because they're trying to make enough money to go back to Ukraine to volunteer. So we're losing here hardcore. I wish our government paid us, to be honest, because damn, dealing with some of these things sometimes.
We need resources.
Yeah. And even the platforms we're working on, like YouTube, they are not really helpful in the terms of monetization. Recently, I got my channel was in an invalid traffic situation. Like maybe there are so many bots commenting, and YouTube lowered my income by 90%, something like that. So it's crazy actually, for if you compare the situation. And there was the recent scandal, I think Operator Starsky said about the Tenet Media, the corporation created by the RT influence. They paid influencers directly, like crazy money, $100,000.
Yeah.
Per one video per week. It's something unreal, like the scale that we have never seen before. Luckily, the scheme wasn't covered. Hopefully there will be investigation for that bit, but the money that Russia is willing to influence into this propaganda, it's really, really crucial. It means that propaganda really matters, that we are in a breach of this really fight against Russia, but in this informational field. So it's really important. I think sometimes even more important than some sort of the weaponry. Like the propaganda plays a great role. And the outcome of the elections really matters for Ukraine. That's why they want to invest such a huge funds there. Yeah,
propaganda matters a lot because Russia is fighting against democracies, and so the propaganda influences the people, the demos that elects these leaders, and the demos that pushes these leaders to do things. Like obviously, Western leaders don't believe that Zelenskyy bought a Bugatti, but their electorate does, and that's the electorate that calls them and harasses them consistently to not support Ukraine, and they want to stay in power. So they have to think about themselves first, unfortunately.
Yeah,
So I
that's
fully,
how it works.
and that's definitely how it works. Also, this is something very fast to backtrack. It's like I think that the West needs to start treating Russia as like a mix of KGB and low grade 90s mobsters. Maybe rewatch The Sopranos. And I think here's the thing: the West doesn't understand Russia, but I think I found the very, very like anyone would get this type of way. Watch The Sopranos. Like, I think watch The Sopranos, see what like the American Italians in New Jersey uh, act like if they're in a mob, and this is how you would want to deal with Putin and his kind of cronies, because that is basically the same thing, but lower grade and Russian. um, I think a good conclusion to this discussion would be, for you. Here's a question for you too. With the information that you know today, right? So not speculating on what Zelensky might know and what our government might know better than us, right? But with the information that you might know today, if you had to come up with the steps for a successful victory plan, what do you think it would need to include?
Uh, so yeah, for me, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. At this stage, I wouldn't like to be a president or any sort of the official of Ukraine, because the decision is really, really hard. Like, we see that Russia still has lots of the resources. There is the information published today that Russian defense ministry, is pushing Putin to announce a new mobilization in Russia. So it's like infinite. They have infinite manpower if we speak about their population. So it's really hard to compete against that aggressive and really powerful country without being supported with everything from the West. Um, but given like signing the second Minsk agreement, but on a larger scale, it's also no go situation, because Russia finally will do what they did with before, like in 2022, maybe on a larger scale, because before it was small territory. Now you have a big front line. Russia may attack from Belarus, from its own territory, from the entire occupied territory, and it's impossible to protect that long front line with all of the military available in the world, maybe. So I don't know actually what to do in this situation. Honestly, I don't have the proper way out without being able to like agree on some terms, not Russian terms, but agree that Ukraine for now is unable to deoccupy the territories. So for now, the best thing as what I would do, to join NATO, but to let those territories, like, to give them uncertain status, like do not recognize that those are Russians or Crimea is Russian, but to get those territories like they are, but to be in NATO. That at least some sort of the guarantee for Ukraine to survive. And after it, just wait for the Russian regime to collapse because of the internal problems inside the Russian territory. I think without the Russian regime collapse, this war is just endless. The problem that Russia should change dramatically for it, because even with the change of Putin, I think that this Russian regime may stay the same. Like, they have this FSB elite, they actually put Putin in power back in 1999. So creating
Mafia.
mafia. They have this mafia in Russia, and it's gonna be very hard to get rid of this. There should be some astonishing movement within Russia, maybe even like collapses the Soviet Union. I don't believe in democratic Russia any longer. Like, after Putin, down to Georgia, to Ukraine. So there should be a dramatic, absolutely huge change within the Russian society or societies. People should understand that there is no go if they live within this regime. And until they have the power, they will, like, Russian regime will continue to follow its goal. They don't need Ukraine. It's their it's their mindset. They want to restore the Soviet Union, and the Ukraine, I think, is just a step for them. They want to join all of the republics to them. They're now successful in Belarus with the soft power. They're now successful in Georgia, which is for me is mind blowing, because there was the war in Georgia, and now you see how Georgian parliament is being supported by the Russian money, and they vote for absolutely crazy laws. They just cut their own initiatives with the European Union, and now leaning towards the Russian peace, Ruski Mir. So it's at the same time scarce, but I'm quite optimistic on a long range, a longer, let's say, time period, that Russia, this regime just cannot live for infinite. Someday it will collapse, but it might take years and years. And for Ukraine, it's important to survive during those years. Ukraine also have big losses. Russia has losses. Ukraine has big losses, but we have much less resources compared to Russia. So maybe it's for Ukraine, it's better to stop, but with guarantees, with NATO membership. Otherwise, it will be second Minsk agreements and with second Russian attack on Kiev and so on.
Well, I think maybe the only way to accomplish that without actually surrendering these territories to Russia, because we've seen what happens when when part of the country joins the Union, and then like Transnistria is this like no man's gray land. I think the only way for that to work is that if in this NATO agreement, the territory Ukraine controls today enters NATO, with every new territory Ukraine liberating. Basically, with every new territory that Ukraine liberates, automatically also applying to that. So that would create a cushion around Ukraine where our soldiers don't have to worry about about these kind of this border that NATO protects. But it's impossible in a way. But
the main thing is not to recognize the Russian territories that they occupied. If Ukraine recognizes it, it's over. I think those territories should not be recognized as Russians, absolutely. And by the time some changes happen in Russia, Ukraine will just take those territories without any fight. I think like that, because honestly, for now, I don't see the military solution really. I mean, Ukraine doesn't have enough resources. The best way, obviously, for Ukraine to obtain everything from the West, F-35s, and liberate entire territory till the 1991. But with the current scenario, I don't see it's happening. Like the West is, we're gonna support you with weaponry, but enough for you to hold, not to occupy your territories. And we see that Russia sometimes even gets more territories than the East. So with this approach, it will lead to more and more losses. And finally, as I said to you, Russia has more army men, more military components they produce. They have long-range missiles. They have aviation. So for Ukraine, it's crucial to enter NATO. And those politicians in the West who say that, okay, we're going to leave Ukraine a neutral country. Well, Ukraine is no-go being neutral. Ukraine should absolutely join NATO for not just security of Ukraine, but security of the European continent and Central Asia.
I agree on that completely. And in my opinion, if we want to have a proper plan for victory, we have to start with proper communication, because currently the society in Europe, in the United States, and around the world generally is poisoned by the Russian toxic disinformation that causes confusion, discord, and violence. And if I had opportunity, to change something, I would trade probably extra F-16s to be able to reach more people and explain them why Russia is dangerous and what the disinformation that is waged in the European countries, in the Asian countries, by the way, in the United States, in the Southern America, what can be the consequence if they succeed. Because we could see a lot of their goals that they wanted to reach, for example, in that investigation of the FBI, increase the indication, fear of future among the population above 50%. What kind of maniacs make such goals for themselves? It's crazy. And people must understand this, but in order to reach them, we need to have much more channels of delivering information in different languages to different social groups. We should work with general public. We should educate them, because it's really hard to train a proper person who would be the informational specialist. It requires years of studying, but you can arm people with facts. The facts that will easily explain why Russian fakes are fakes. And armed with this, armed with people's support around the world, we would be able to arm Ukraine properly on the battlefield. And having proper weaponry and long-range weapons, we have to reach other steps, which is improving defense, which is building proper defense line. Then we need to make those territories that are currently occupied by Russians, we want to make them a burden. We want to do, in a way so they would consider having and controlling those territories not worth, not worth the money. We have to disrupt their corrupted schemes of delivering necessary equipment and parts through Kazakhstan, through Asian countries to Russia. And in order to do that, again, we need to have support of the population, of the citizens. We need to have support of the secret services as well. I'm sure they do their job, but they also need resources, like everybody. And we need them to have all proper resources to be able to disrupt those schemes. And in the end, we must ensure that doesn't matter how the war ends, but if Russia keeps those territories, they will never be recognized, and Russia will be sanctioned forever. If Russia keeps them for 100 years, they will be sanctioned for 100 years. And we should also implement one, like it's an obvious thing, but we never talk about it. Russians wage their psyops against Ukrainian society, against European society, American society, but we don't really work with the Russian population. It's hard. I understand Russia is isolated. Russia shut down like access to Twitter, to Facebook, Instagram, etc., for everybody else except Medvedev, for example, right? But we should work with them. And Russian opposition that works with the Russian population through YouTube, which is again completely ineffective because YouTube is so slow in Russia nowadays.
Also, Russian opposition is ineffective because they're not anti-imperialist, they're just anti-Putin. So it's better if we work with them. Yeah.
Yulia, you are reading my thoughts. That's my thoughts exactly, because Russian opposition, basically, let's just give them shelter somewhere, and forget about them, because they are absolutely ineffective and worthless. Seriously.
They're like, in my opinion, honestly, they're worse than Putin because they can't even accomplish anything. It's like, it's so funny. It's, I sorry for interrupting you, but I'm so happy that someone also said this, because I love how Navalny collects all of this money from Russian citizens for doing nothing, genuinely buys expensive clothes, because we've seen her, wear the expensive clothes that are like $1,000 for shoes. And people will fight you when you bring it up and you're like, you do understand that their organization hasn't done anything in the past year, 2 years, right? 3 years. They haven't accomplished a single thing. You keep giving them millions of dollars. They don't tell you where this money goes. And then you see her, a volunteer worker who lives off of people's donations, wearing shoes that cost $1,000, and Russians are like so mad about. I'm not even going to go there because we're going to stay here another hour.
I will finish, Yulia. I will finish for you. I feel ashamed and sorry for Navalny himself, because nobody deserves such fate, right? And the only proper Russian opposition that exists and that I respect is Siberian Battalion, Russian Voluntary Corps, and Legion Freedom for Russia, that are currently fighting, helping Ukrainian armed forces to fight Russian invaders. That is the only proper Russian opposition that exists, because sometimes you have to fight for freedom and democracy, sacrificing something. That's all. I'm done.
Yulia.
Well, I was just going to say that I think the good summary of this is that we need more communication, both with our people and trying to break Russia's walls again. We did that in the beginning of the invasion. It didn't work. Maybe we can try again. But I think in order for a victory plan of any kind to work, Ukraine and Ukraine's government needs to stop sugarcoating things to us, because I think we're, big girls and boys and we can take it. And the more we know, the better we can actually navigate this environment. And the West needs to stop worrying so much about what Russia is going to think, and they need to start making Russia worry about what the West is going to think. And that's the first baby steps to any victory of any kind to happen.
Yeah, indeed. About the Russian society, still we need to find some sort of the tools to to split their society. For their opposition leaders are like Navalny was like more or less, he has something like he sacrificed, like he went there, but he created a nice video about Putin, Medvedev. He turned many people into this some sort of the opposition thinking against the Russian regime. But we need also to split their society. If we say that, all the Russians support Putin, like, yes, I believe that many of the Russians, majority, they still do. They have this brainwash, but we shouldn't put everyone into this kind of the basket, because the key is to crack the society. If they see that, they say that all the Russians like that will support Putin in this case. So we need to create this some sort of we need to act smart, and also say that some part of the Russian opposition is good, but obviously Navalny is a kind of, for me, she's a kind of cringy person. Really, she doesn't deserve that position at all. It's my personal opinion.
Tikhanovskaya, it's kind of all of these characters that are opposition figures. I feel like they might be paid for Putin to look better, honestly, because all they do is they make Putin look better. Because you just look at them and you're like, wow, you are completely useless and brainless. Well, you guys, thank you so much for joining me today and talking about, Ukraine's hopefully imminent victory, and what we can do to accomplish it, what the West can do to accomplish it, and how we can start getting there to begin with. So I'm very grateful for all of your time that you dedicated to this today, and I hope to see you on the channel again. Starsky has become quite a quite a frequent flyer here. maybe you can start earning miles here as well.
Thank you, Yulia. Thank you, Yulia, for having us today.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure, and I really, really hope to see you guys next time very, very soon.
See you, Starsky.
See you. Well, this was Red Lines, and as always, I hope we crossed some of yours in terms of political speak. I will not be seeing you next week, but that's because my amazing co-host, Henry Keene, is going to be substituting for me while I will be at the Action Ukraine Summit in DC. So there is going to be a lot to discuss when I come back from there. And next time I see you, it is going to be from my apartment in NYC. And right now, I'm in my mother's kitchen. So hey, something new here. Anyways, in the meanwhile, please like this video, share it with friends, and comment underneath it whether you agree with us and maybe you have some constructive criticism that we're always happy to hear. I will see you next time, and please follow this channel. Thanks.